Welcome everyone. I am Mr. Goldenbaum, and this is Supremacy 1914. We have reached day number 3, and with that, you can see over here on the top right, or was the top left, I don't remember. I think mobile might have it on one side versus the other side. Regardless, blood has been spilled. The peace period is over. All-out war has begun on every front across the board. So let's take a look at the paper here. Day 3, and as you can see, we're right on top. Spain on top. This looks good. I like this. This is a great start to day 3 of the tournament. So Italy made some really nice plays here in the north, but it was a bit less so Italy's plays and more so Austria's positioning, or probably call it lack thereof. When we took a look at the last episode, German troops were shifting around and Swedish forces were landing. You can see Germany has covered the entire Innsbruck direction here and is covering their Munich province after Italy took over these Swiss provinces. But alas, Austria overcommitted in the east and did not station a proper garrison here in Trieste. He was able to build a level 2 fortress, or at least mostly complete a level 2 fortress. He was able to bring out the hero, and I always forget his name, Johann Aardvark Mace, to begin construction on a few trenches. And the trench had actually completed before this assault had complete, before the assault was launched. But with the day change and the expiration of the AI period, he did not have enough troops in this area. He had maybe 10,000 strong after spawning Lawrence, right after the, or I should say, right at the start of the day 3 tick change. So we did have a few reinforcements, but sadly it was not enough. And after Italy captured the province, he did assume the fortification, which I believe at that small percentage, it's really not providing any protection at this stage. However, Austria was sending all of his forces to reinforce this province, but unfortunately it was too little too late, and now you can see a bunch of stragglers here. Austria will probably turn these two around if he is paying attention, but these are all great wins for Italy. If I were Italy, I'd probably march out some of these forces like Lawrence and clean up some of these minor provinces, potentially put pressure on Vienna. This balloon that's coming in is providing some good view range, so when Italy does come back, he'll have a great tactical view of the entire battlefield. And with that, I don't see Vienna surviving unless these Russian reinforcements, and hopefully for Austria these are significant Russian reinforcements, will be able to arrive in time to stall the Italian advance. Over in the southeast, we actually had a major engagement between the Turkish forces and the Austrians over by the province of Üsküp. Totally saying that one correctly, guys. Don't even question me. And the Austrian forces stopped just short, but they were within Austrian territory. So at that point, the Turkish forces marched out to meet the Austrian force, which was smaller in number. And the Turks had the bonus of Hank, whereas the Austrian troops, I believe it was just straight up infantry. And although the Turkish troops lost 30,000 or so, they were able to wipe out a pretty significant stack from Austria. And we'll take a look at the paper here. We'll just cover all of the actual casualties, since this is going to impact the rest of the game in calculating how many troops Austria has left. But it was a significant blow to the Austrians, and as a result, Turkey is going to be able to claim the province of Nisk and sack a good amount of wood straight from the Austrians. And with the Austrians having a good amount of material production, including wood, he should be able to get the full value based off of the daily production. I say full value, I believe it's around like 50% for a sack. But overall, things are looking great on the Turkish front. You have the Russians that have made additional progress in Romania. They actually sacked the capital in Bucharest and managed to take a few of these other provinces in the area as well. The Romanians put up The Romanian AI managed to put up a little bit of a valiant effort, sending a few troops over here to take some of the core territory out of Austria. And what we can actually do is switch over to Province Morale. And you can see that all of these Austrian provinces have around 91%. You can see that all of these Austrian provinces either have low 90 to high 80% morale, whereas this province over here is only at 70% as the Romanians were able to sack it. Turkey's pulling a lot of his forces over to Constantinople to counter a threat coming from the Russians, but the Russians at this point have only 40,000 troops in the area. They have a few more in reserve. We assume they have a large stack moving over here into the west to save Austria, but at this stage it's not going to be enough to challenge Turkey. And if you look at the southwest here, we have 119,000 Moroccan troops, plus some armored cars led by Orhan and Hank arriving onto the battlefield to reinforce the Turks. Now, Turkey is going to be in a great position here. Certainly a lot of production going on. Infrastructure is expanding in both of these provinces, along with one armored car and a cavalry unit. So this capital, he's going to have a really good hold on this capital, and he'll be able to push back against the Russians should they try anything in this area. And should they shift their forces to the front, he'll certainly have an opportunity to attack through the neutral nation of Bulgaria. Meanwhile, his forces here, he's got a total of 70,000 troops already going up against 47,000 Austrian troops led by Hank and Orhan on this end. Things aren't looking good for Austria. Once these reinforcements arrive, they're going to be able to start carving up a lot of these Austrian provinces and putting pressure on the Russian mainland, as well as some of the German core territories as well. If they're able to push over there through Poland, they'd be able to cut off this lower supply line that our enemies can use to reinforce the provinces. They would still keep their supply lines over here in the north, but it would certainly be much more difficult to shift forces around, taking the long way instead of this little shortcut over here. We do have a few scouts going into the area here. I'm tempted to try to go for a capital sack at this stage. Unfortunately, the distance is going to be a little too long, and the Germans will realize. However, we can certainly make a play over here by the two German coastal provinces here in the east. They have a good amount of grain, but regardless, a sack in this area, it's going to be a bit of a risk, but maybe we've got a shot. If anything, it puts our opponents on high morale, and they're required to start stationing a lot of soldiers to defend these coastal provinces. If they don't defend these provinces, then we're going to get some free captures. France and Sweden, it was an absolute bloodbath. So some of the Swedish forces that we saw in the prior episode that were sailing the English Channel, some of these forces returned, landed in Germany, and started reinforcing the front. So you have 55,000 troops here. You had a few of the Swedish forces land back in Sweden due to the threat of just 4,000 troops sailing around in this area, which is great. And it looks like they're actually building fortifications. And I bet you there's a fortification over here in the grain province as well. So certainly a huge waste of iron. And sure, Sweden can afford it, but that means resources that he's not going to be able to use on his infrastructure, maybe sending it to his allies for additional infrastructure, or funding some additional armored cars or fortifications in the front, or even saving up some of those resources for additional mechanized production or naval assets in the middle to late game here as soon as they're unlocked. So this 4,000 has done extremely well, tied up a ton of Swedish forces, but more importantly, and I keep forgetting, a contingent of Swedish forces, I believe around 20,000 or so, attempted to land off the coast of Belgium here, or I should say specifically Netherlands, but this is all part of Belgium for some reason. And as soon as they landed, the French troops sprung into action and hit a lot of these Swedish troops in the middle of disembarking, meaning that a lot of the soldiers that were considered transport ships. And if we take a look at one of these units, we can see that infantry that has disembarked only has 1 attack and 1 defense with 10 hit points per 1,000 infantry, or per each one of these infantry stacks. Meanwhile, you take a look at a normal land-based infantry unit that has not been deployed to sea, has double the hit points and 4 times the attack, meaning it was a complete massacre. France lost maybe 1 or 2,000 troops while wiping out an entire 20,000 Swedish contingent. But otherwise, this front has been stagnant with Germany. We have a fortification race going on in these 2 key provinces, and they will be key due to the short travel distance, not to mention the double steel production on our side. So once we do get some artillery out, it's going to be very easy to pepper back and forth. So this is a very key and critical area, but unfortunately Germany has a larger front to defend, and with Austria potentially collapsing, it's going to be even more difficult to station a sufficient garrison on a lot of these areas. So France right now is playing the long game. He's going to be looking for openings and taking these openings as they arise. This Allenby, I assume, is just kind of clearing up hero space, going for this province, which, sure, shifted a few troops around, tied them up so they didn't reinforce Italy. And it looks like the Italians have returned, and they are mopping up some of these soldiers, which is great. Maybe they'll go for the capital sack. That would be nice to see, though I am not sure if they would arrive in time to beat the Russians. But potentially through a forced march or even a Lawrence solo attack, he may just arrive in time to... He may just arrive in time. Meanwhile, here in the Southwest, compared to everyone else, it's been a little uneventful. We are playing a little bit of cat and mouse with 3,000 British ships here that have decided to sail off the coast of Spain and France. I am dedicating a decent amount of troops, 18,000. Not that I couldn't do the math without selecting all the troops. But I kind of want to clear up some of these forces to alleviate pressure from these French provinces and my coast. I just don't want this 3,000 stack potentially sailing further south and causing issues for Morocco. I want Morocco to focus on the east. I want to be able to shift a lot of my soldiers directly onto the front. And this would be a pretty easy 3,000. We did make, at this stage, we should be able to arrive at this node prior to the British, and within looks like 2 hours or so, and the British can move and go into a different area, but he's going to be boxed in. We have an additional 6,000 soldiers that will also be arriving into the area. If he moves just a little bit further out and we hit this node in 2 hours, and then we eventually hit this node before the British, unless he uses a forced march, which is always an option, though we will be keeping an eye as well. This 3,000 stack will be out, and then we'll be able to shift all of these forces to potentially put additional pressure in the north. We had a few easy wins here of scouting British ships, but otherwise the presence of a few thousand of our troops have limited Britain's activity just in this area. He has the fortifications that we looked on previously. He is actually building a harbor, so a little bit of infrastructure is coming in, nothing in Manchester, but he's got soldiers all across the coast. He's got at least 10,000 over here sitting in Ireland as well. He's got 13,000 that he just keeps ferrying back and forth for... I mean, hey, Britain, I don't know what you're doing, but you've got plenty of troops here. You have scouts. I'm not doing anything. These troops would have been better put to use on any other kind of engagement. I'm not sure this is providing you any value at this point, but on our side, it is a win-win, dedicating only a few thousand troops of our own and tying up the entirety of Britain's forces outside of 30,000, which actually transported over to Germany around the same time as the Swedish troops. We have 3 key fronts in this war, and we've scored 3 huge wins just across the board. So it's setting us up in a real good position. And let's take a look at the newspaper as well. The newspaper can provide you with a lot of valuable information, especially on engagements that you may not have full line of sight. So especially early on here when they were potentially going after a few AI nations, you can actually take a look at the descriptions to find out the size of the opponent's army and how many troops they may be committing to a separate front. Usually that's more beneficial in a larger map with a lot of other players and teams. In a smaller map like this, you kind of know what's going on. So really it's for the AI. But regardless, you take a look at the Turkish victory against the Austrians. They were able to destroy 52,000 at a loss of only 31,000. The troop losses here were relatively similar early on into a lot of these engagements, but as the Austrian forces started to dwindle, so did their attack power, and they weren't able to cause as much damage onto the Ottomans as the Ottomans were able to apply onto the Austrians. You have Italy and Austria. This engagement at the beginning was more in favor of the Austrians. However, the Austrians just were not able to reinforce that province early enough. It was a huge blunder on their part by not reinforcing that province. And as a result, after taking over the province, we can see based off of the paper that the Austrian troops just got destroyed one after another, just across the board. Not to mention that they did lose heroes. They lost cavalry. They lost their Lawrence as well. Just huge wins across the board. Not just these small brigades, but even an entire infantry division that was not being managed by the Austrians. We have 1,000 loss of French troops to the British. And then here we have the 20,000. Here we have the 20,000 Swedish troops that were entirely destroyed due to the French. You have the Russians losing a few against the Romanians. You have, oh, look at this guy, MVP right here, taking out an entire 1,000 British forces. Unfortunately, we are just too far away from the front to cause, to sway the outcome immediately. But we have begun industrializing our nation. We are building additional harbors. We are starting railroad production. We are funding some of Morocco's industrialization as well in some of their key energy provinces. We are also helping Turkey industrialize a lot of their key resources, especially this double material. We are funding the French, the Italians, and the Turks with our excess grain production. We are slowly converting a lot of our existing fish stockpiles into grain and sending that off to the front, as the French have cavalry production capacity as well as the Italians and the Turks, where we're going to avoid investing an entire, if I go to the construction, 1,500 wood and 1,500 grain, when these resources can easily be converted to one of these other provinces that are closer to the front. But our strategy, in addition to some of the resource management for our team, we are preparing for the late game. So as soon as the day ticks over for day 6, we will begin factory production over here in Spain. And with the initial factory production, we are going to focus our attention to cruisers. As much as I would like to invest additional resources into submarines and into battleships, the benefit of battleships really won't come into play until later on into a game. And if we are capped at day 15, and I'd say that's the tick to day 15, that's not even day 15, the full day itself, we're not going to get any benefit from these battleships, whereas cruisers will be able to mass produce a lot of them and sail our forces over here into the British Isles and just start going to town. We will focus on his single harbor province with the threat that, hey, potentially he could build a few submarines of his own, potentially the capital, maybe split off our forces and take over the entirety of the British Isles. Sweden may produce a navy of his own, which is why we have a few scouts coming up here into the north. I want to know if he's begun construction of harbors. The same thing with this 1,000 unit. unless we go for an opportunity here in the south, I do want to see if he is producing a harbor in addition to some other production. Though this province is just so far away from the front that even if he builds something, we could set up a few forces over here in the Baltic Sea to intercept. So if a submarine goes by, we'll know and we'll have time to react accordingly, include an escort with our own cruisers, and or potentially crank out a submarine of our own. But at that point, if there is a stalemate on the front and nothing else happens, we should be in a good opportunity to take over the entirety of the British Isles. We have better production than they do. They've been over-investing. They've been building fortifications. They've been losing a few troops, mainly the Swedish here. We're in a good position. We do appreciate likes, comments, and with that, we'll see you all on the next one.